Good evening, everyone. Oh, come on, do a little better than that. Good evening, everyone. The meeting of the Southeastern Pennsylvania First Suburbs Project is now called to order. My name is Kirby Hudson, and I'm the interim city manager for the city of Coatesville, which is one of the institutional members for the First Suburbs Project. I am your co-chair for this evening's meeting. Now I'm going to ask everyone to please rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening.
Good evening.
That sounded good. I'm Ed Crenshaw, the pastor of the host church tonight, Victory Christian Fellowship, which, like Coatesville, is an institutional member of the Southeastern Pennsylvania First Suburbs Project. As tonight's meeting's other co-chair, I want to welcome you to our church and to tell you a little bit about why this meeting is so important to me, to our congregation. Ironically, for a meeting that deals with issues of race and poverty and segregation, I was born in Mississippi. I didn't live there too many years, but we visited almost every year of my life, and I indeed saw evidence of prejudice, segregation. I remember visiting Water Valley, Mississippi. Anybody here from there? Didn't think so. Remember visiting Water Valley, Mississippi and being downtown on a Saturday, hot summer day in Mississippi, and I wanted a drink. And on the sidewalks in those days, they had the wrought iron type water fountains, and I approached one to take a drink, and somebody stopped me and said, "No, you can't drink from that water fountain. That's the colored fountain." And I remember that struck me as very strange. And of course, in Tennessee and Kentucky, where I grew up, I saw signs of racial tension and prejudice. But here's the funny thing about my experience growing up. Even though there was prejudice, even though there was sometimes tension, we lived together across racial lines. The schools that I attended from elementary on were all very integrated. And of course, over the years, we saw the racial tension settle and ease some, and there was less segregation, there was advance. And of course, as I went on and experienced life in the Army and the military, that was a very integrated experience. We learned to get along across potential racial divides. So most of my life, while I saw evidence of prejudice, was one of racial integration, because we all shared life together in many respects. And the truth is, I didn't really experience what I would call severe segregation, extreme segregation, until something happened 18 and a half years ago. And then something happened in my life that brought me face to face with the kind of segregation that I had never seen before. And what happened 18 and a half years ago is I moved to Southeastern Pennsylvania. And I saw segregation like I didn't see in the South, because here the schools are more segregated. Here there are communities that are locked out of opportunity, and what we see so often is those division lines are along the lines of poverty and race. Maybe not intentionally, but that's how it has worked out. And as a pastor, as a congregation, we see that as a moral problem. We see it as a moral issue. We see it as injustice when, based on poverty and based on race, people do not have the opportunities that I believe in Southeastern Pennsylvania they ought to have. Our church is a very multicultural church. If you walked in here on a Sunday morning, you wouldn't see too much difference in terms of the racial composition that you see right now. In fact, we have approximately 40 nations represented here by place of birth of our congregants. And we believe that this is something that God desires, that we be together and united and integrated along racial lines, and that we give those who are locked out of hope and opportunity a chance to succeed and to get the best educations that are possible. So these are moral issues for us, but they're not just moral issues for the church. These are issues that affect all of our lives. These are issues that affect the well-being of our local economy. These are things that affect our businesses and our schools and every other institution. And if we want sustainability, if we want to see people have an opportunity for success, if we want our region to grow economically, we must deal with these issues. And so these are important issues for our church, and I hope for every single one of us here. And that's why, as a church, we are members of the First Suburbs Project. And we're very pleased to be hosting this meeting tonight with the end of making a difference and giving increased opportunity to those who have been locked out.
I would now like to introduce David Rusk, one of the preeminent urban experts in the nation today. Mr. Rusk's books, Cities Without Suburbs and Inside Game, Outside Game, are the virtual Bible for regionalism movement. In addition to his strong analytical skills, Mr. Rusk has a great deal of political experience, having served as a former federal official, a New Mexico legislator, and mayor of Albuquerque. As an independent consultant on urban and suburban policy, he has spoken and consulted in over 120 U.S. communities and abroad as well. He joins us tonight as a consultant for the First Suburbs Project, completing for us a municipal opportunity index that helps us understand what he calls the geography of opportunity, the policies that led our fragmentation, and the policies that help us heal, which divides us. Mr. Rusk.
Thank you very much. We're here tonight to talk about the leveraging of municipal opportunity in order to create greater fairness and balance in our region. Need to have my booth catch up with me here. Here we go. And I'd like to do that by focusing on a municipal opportunity index. As my colleague and strategic partner of Southeast Pennsylvania First Suburbs, John Powell, has said, these days it is space, not race, that has become the mechanism for dividing people and for apportioning opportunities in life. Well, what is the geography of opportunity in Southeast Pennsylvania? We constructed a municipal opportunity index in which we said it's all about access to good jobs, and let's measure how many jobs are located in every municipality and the trend of jobs. Are they growing or are they declining? 35% of the index. Let's talk about good schools and the relationship between the economic level of the children in the school and the outcomes in the school is so close that we measure that in terms of the percentage of low-income children in a school and the trends in that, another 35%. Good tax base is important, both for municipal services and to finance the local schools, 10%. And finally, the concept of stable, safe neighborhoods, good neighborhoods. Let's measure that in terms of median family income in the municipality and the family poverty rate, 20%. Now, looking at all of those factors and rating every one of the 237 suburban municipalities against all the others by those indicators, our region's 238 municipalities are divided into 23 maximum opportunity towns that on our maps will be colored green, 37 high opportunity towns that on the maps will be blue, 43 medium opportunity towns on the maps gray, 59 low opportunity towns on the maps, yellow, 75 minimum opportunity towns on the maps, orange, and the one central city, Philadelphia, that will be colored red. Now, even though there are a wide range of different numbers of towns, they all add up within each category to about 495,000 people, cumulative population, plus or minus a few thousand. So these 5 categories are equal in population. Well, let's start with our central city, Philadelphia, and then move to the minimum opportunity towns in orange. And you can see they really fall in 3 categories. You've got older suburbs along the river, particularly in Delaware County. You've got places like Norristown, historic focal points that have been in decline, or Coatesville. And then you've got some of the more rural townships, particularly out there in western Chester County, where there are relatively few people and relatively few jobs. So they rank low in terms of job supply. Moving on to the low opportunity communities, colored in yellow. You can see the patterns there, the same pattern, the close-in communities, and then the more far-flung rural areas. Medium opportunity, gray, 43 towns. High opportunity, 37 of them in the blue. And finally, maximum opportunity, the 23 that are in green. And these are very familiar to you. Many of them, for example, are out the 202 corridor. And in fact, I spent an hour and a half driving out from, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, for heaven's sakes, driving out from 30th Street Station to get here, passing through a lot of these areas like Lower and Upper Marion. And let me tell you, I saw a lot of new construction going on in Upper Marion. Well, this isn't by accident, these patterns. They're explicit state and local and federal government policies that really help to account and foster this kind of divided geography. For decades, for example, our explicit national urban policy has focused spending tens of billions of dollars to try to revitalize central cities. But in those same decades, at the same time, the implicit, often unspoken, suburban policy has been spending not tens of billions, but hundreds of billions of dollars to facilitate the flight from the central cities and from the oldest close-in suburbs, ever moving outward to the outer suburbs. And I saw an awful lot of public infrastructure going into the ground just in that drive out, as I say, from 30th Street Station this afternoon. So, a focus on the central cities through urban policy, a focus on promoting sprawl, frankly, through the implicit patterns of spending of the federal government and the state funds to match, whereas the older first suburbs are towns in the middle, the very member communities that stood up here one by one and said, we are institutional members of the First Suburbs Project. They have been neglected by federal and state policy, yet these very communities, in their racial and their economic diversity, represent the kinds of America that we say we want to be in our ideals, but they are neglected. Well, there are 3 big challenges that create obstacles to improving the opportunity in the older suburbs. Job sprawl, low-performing schools, and the concentration, I would say over-concentration, of affordable housing in these communities. Let's talk about job sprawl. Well, from 1998 to 2006, the city and the inner-ring suburbs lost 14,000 jobs, between 1% and 2% of their total job supply. While the outer-ring suburbs, just in those 8 years before the Great Recession, added 160,000 new jobs, or grew by 11%. And looking at that, let's just talk about what some of those are. Well, City of Philadelphia, as your central city, is still, the major center of jobs in this region. But from 1990 to 2010, it went down from 837,000 jobs to 722,000 jobs. Almost 1 out of every 6 jobs in the city of Philadelphia was lost during that 20-year period. Whereas Upper Marion, 56,000 jobs, plus 20%. Lower Marion, 44,000 jobs, not a whole lot of growth during that period, 3%. Fred, 38,000 jobs, plus 53%. You got East Whiteland here, 27,000 jobs located there, plus 48%. Or West Whiteland, 23,500 jobs, plus 57%. All of these located farther and farther out in the geography of the region, often both beyond the transportation reach of public transportation, but also placing severe constraints upon housing, as we will say. And there were billions of dollars of infrastructure investment that supported this growth and that bypassed our towns in the middle. Let's talk about schools. I mentioned to you the relationship of concentrations of low-income children and school performance. Well, here's the percentage of free and reduced-priced meals, the so-called farm percentages, by the category of the Municipal Opportunity Index. The maximum opportunity towns, 6%. High opportunity towns, 7%. Medium opportunity towns, 12%. Low opportunity towns, 20%. Minimum opportunity towns, 37%. City of Philadelphia, 77%. But there are communities, such as Chester City, in that minimum opportunity category that get up to the levels of the City of Philadelphia, for example. Our Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, but not notably the Secretary of Education. Our Secretary of Housing and Urban Development recognizes the impact of these kinds of patterns. He says children's futures, unfortunately, are determined not by their talents or actions, but on the zip code in which they are raised. And frankly, when you think about that, I bet almost everybody in this audience knows that to be true. Housing policy is school policy. Where a child lives largely shapes the kind of educational opportunity they're going to have. And here is a study that represents the most definitive research that's ever been done about the impact on the education of low-income children of mixed-income classrooms. This is from Montgomery County, Maryland, one of the nation's wealthier counties, but it's very much structurally different from Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, for example. County government is the fundamental government of Montgomery County. There are very few municipalities in Montgomery County, Maryland, and they have one county-wide school system. And for 35 years, almost 40 years, they have had the nation's most progressive and by far largest mandatory mixed-income housing policy. So that most public housing families in Montgomery County, they don't live in projects. They live in townhouses and apartments scattered all over the county, including many of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the entire United States. And what this shows is that those children that are living in those higher income neighborhoods and going to the neighborhood schools surrounded by overwhelmingly higher income children coming from parents, highly educated parents. These are the so-called green zone schools in Montgomery County. And the public housing children here, you'll see that green line, they are constantly improving and closing the gap between themselves and the county-wide average, constantly. Whereas in Montgomery County, they have some neighborhoods that are poor, nothing that approaches areas of Philadelphia or Chester, for example, but they're on the whole relatively poor. And into those schools, the county-wide public school department district pours additional resources, smaller classes, much more teacher training, full-day kindergarten. They call these the red zone schools. They do everything in Montgomery County that the U.S. Department of Education's race to the top says that it's doing. You know, and what happens with the kids in the red zone schools? You can see they may improve for a little while in very small ways, but as they get closer and closer to being teenagers, they lose ground because they're being impacted by all the low-income children around them as well. And so what works in Montgomery County is economic integration, is really what accounts for these differences in patterns. So school policy is housing policy as well, because as you know, family, middle-class family, some power to choose where they're going to live, they will almost invariably reach for what they perceive to be the best neighborhoods with the best schools that they can afford. Not because they know much about the principals or the teachers, but because they know something about the economic level of the families that are sending their kids to those schools. School policy is housing policy. Housing policy is school policy. Focusing on housing. Outer suburbs, exclusionary practices. Local zoning codes that require large minimum-sized lots for a home, or add all sorts of costs to rental housing, or even don't allow rental housing, combined with federal government housing policies. These things combine to make our first suburbs, homes and rentals, the only real choice for low-income and modest-income families that are moving up and moving out, if need be. Look, through federal housing vouchers, Section 8, you know, helping low-income families move up in life, and if need be, moving out of the neighborhoods where they are into other neighborhoods. That's a good thing. But there can be too much of a good thing. There can be too much of a good thing when the voucher holders are overly concentrated just in certain towns or certain neighborhoods. It's bad for the town, but it's also bad for those families to recreate right around them the very conditions they were trying to move away from. So it's very, very important that this be done on a scattered, equitable, reasonable basis. Well, let's see how it may be functioning here in Southeast Pennsylvania. Let's look at the category of the minimum opportunity towns just in Delaware and Montgomery County, where I've done some additional study of rent levels. There are 38 of them, you can see. The top of that group is Ridley, the very bottom of that group is Colwyn. And current Section 8 policies, under current Section 8 policies, how many of these 38 towns are affordable, are within the reach of having properties rentable by Section 8 voucher holders? How many of them are there? Every one. All 38 are, affordable communities under HUD's fair market rent guidelines currently. Well, let's take a look at the maximum opportunity towns. Those last ones were the orange communities. These are the green communities, and here are the 10 that are just in Delaware and Montgomery counties. How many of these are affordable under HUD's current Section 8 policies? Not one. That's the geography of opportunity, folks. That's the way this happens. Now let's take a moment. How does it happen? It happens because for this region and across the country, HUD's so-called fair market rents are established based upon the region-wide average rent. And I'm going to oversimplify the more complicated process. But the point is simply that for the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey metropolitan area, both sides of the river, the median rent in gross rent in 2009 was $880. Let's just say that that's the maximum that HUD can go. They've got a little bit of flexibility, but that's the maximum, $880. Well, you look at Upper Marion. Upper Marion's median rent was not $880. It was $1122. There might be a few apartments up here in Upper Marion that would fall below $880, but not much, you see. And so that's why you get none of those maximum opportunity towns that are reachable by somebody that's holding, a family that's holding a Section 8 voucher. But there is potentially help on the way. HUD is talking about implementing what they call a fair market rent by zip code pilot program. Not one that the maximum rents are established by a region-wide average of 5 million people, but one that is established by the average rent in every zip code in that region. So that basically the zip code that holds Upper Marion, for example, that average rent would be, you know, the ceiling for families moving from somewhere else looking to move into Upper Marion. Well, of those 12 or 10 maximum opportunity towns in Delaware and Montgomery County under this possible fair market rent by zip code pilot program, how many would be affordable? 8 to 10. And I can tell you that the two that aren't there are Lower Marion and Montgomery. And Lower Marion is just statistically a hair above what would be needed. So obviously there are apartments there that would be affordable. That's the potential way of both diversifying those communities and opening up opportunity for low-income families through that one federal housing policy. Well, Ron Sims says HUD is committed to ending the tyranny of the zip code. And I believe it. I've heard Ron Sims as the keynote speaker at our own Building One America conference back in September 2009. I've heard him speak in Seattle. I heard him speak for the Building One New Jersey conference in July of last year. He's going to be the keynote speaker at the Building One Maryland conference in mid-year this year, for example. I've been in numerous meetings with Ron Sims. He's the most inspirational speaker I have heard since my civil rights days in the 1960s. But it's time to move past inspirational speeches to actual action and reality. And your partners in the New Jersey Regional Coalition worked hard with the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission to put together a Sustainable Communities grant that was not selected by HUD. Now we have the opportunity for fair market rent by zip code pilot, you know, and I think it's time for Mr. Sims, Deputy Sims, to step up and deliver for this region. Building One America's agenda, you've heard it from the podium, developing revitalized central cities, stabilize older suburbs, diversify the newer suburbs. How do we do that? We do that here in Southeast Pennsylvania by changing land use policies, by changing fiscal policies, by changing housing policies, and by organizing to bring these policy changes about. They won't happen just out of the blue. Change land use policies. State and federal infrastructure investment should prioritize maintenance and rehabilitation of existing water and sewer systems, not subsidize urban sprawl. They should prioritize transportation dollars to improve and maintain the transportation systems in lower and middle opportunity towns, our member communities. Looking at the map of opportunity, that means concentrating federal and state dollars on rebuilding and strengthening the infrastructure of the yellow, gray, and orange communities communities and stop subsidizing the growth into the blue and green communities. Changing fiscal policies. State aid formulas for schools should reward diversity, denser development, and smart growth, and provide greatest support for districts with the least tax base and the most economic and racial diversity. Who's that? It's our first suburbs. These policies, in other words, should reward the orange, yellow, and gray communities, and not provide as much support as they have in the past to the blue and the green, which can fend much better for themselves. Changing housing policies. State, federal, county housing programs and funds should stop concentrating affordable housing in lower opportunity communities, our towns. And they should start creating mixed income, integrated communities in the high opportunity areas of our region. Looking at the map. Stabilize the orange, yellow, and gray communities, or for those that are on the rural fringes, help them stay rural, if that is their choice. And for the high opportunity communities, the blues and the greens, to diversify them mandatorily. If you're going to get federal dollars, if you're going to get state dollars, here's what you have to do. You have to take your fair share. Who are the very people who are often working in the hospitals and working in the nursing homes. Finally, HUD, in doing the partnership with the First Suburbs, county housing authorities, regional stakeholders, take a regional approach, develop a comprehensive analysis of impediments to fair housing, create a fair housing plan to address all obstacles to mobility and inclusion, implement a small area fair market rent program in this region to make sure that all the federal tools are used to end discrimination in housing. And we must organize, we must organize, we must organize our orange communities, we must organize our yellow communities, we must organize our gray communities, and create a political alliance with our central city, the city of Philadelphia. That alliance represents 65 to 70% of the people of this region. And that alliance is then a winning alliance. Thank you very much.